welcome. I'm so excited to introduce the wonderful Julia to the podcast today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
This has been a long time coming because I was on your podcast and we were like, all right, like we need to do this again as an excuse for like a girls' night because y'all, Julia is one of the most badass women I know. But before I get into a gush fest, because she's going to do it better than I can, why don't you introduce yourself to the people who don't know and just who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, it has been a long time coming. We did an amazing podcast, didn't we? A two-part about abusive dynamics. So I work with single mums, basically. I'm a love, sex and relationship coach, and I work exclusively with single mums across all aspects of your romantic and intimate life, whether that be with a partner or by yourself. So just mums. Yeah, so we had a really great chat about abusive dynamics, how to spot them, and today I'm back, and we're gonna jump in with some other sides of things, and it's really exciting. I know it's been ages, but I have had the worst morning sickness for the last 12 weeks. I'm currently about 4.5 months pregnant, so I've come out the other side, but I had to take time off. Basically, I thought if I'm not going to give myself that grace, then what the hell am I doing coaching anyone? So I just took basically 12 weeks off. So it has been longer than I would have liked, but I'm really happy we can do it now.
That in and of itself is such a powerful concept. I'm not gonna like live here, we're gonna talk about other things, but just how you mentioned, like, if I'm not gonna give myself grace, who am I to coach it? Like, it's so hard. It is so hard. And I just got off a coaching call and we had a very similar conversation of like, we don't preach these things because we're perfect. We preach these things because we know how important they are. And we're on the journey too. So I just wanted to draw attention to that because the fact that you admit that, not enough people admit that they're teaching it and struggling at the same time. So I just think that's really such a great thing to talk about.
I mean, especially if it's something you're so passionate about. I mean, I know you must feel this as well. Like the work that I do with the moms that I work with is so important to me that it was the last thing I wanted to do was drop that. But having to prioritize just your health sometimes, your family, my kids were off school, and I think it's really important that sometimes you just have to go, okay, this is where we are now. We're just going to have to do this. So yeah, I'm very excited to be back and working again.
That's so great. That's so good. So I genuinely feel like we could just sit and talk for like hours. And if I'm not careful, we're not going to get to the good stuff. So, okay, yeah. I've got my outline right here, which is why I'm looking off screen. But okay, so let's start talking about what it means to be a single mom in today's society. Because I feel like that's such a loaded thing to say. But people, anyway, I'm just going to let you take the lead because just go for it.
Oh gosh, I feel like this could be the whole podcast. I'll keep it as brief as I can and kind of try and specialize it towards kind of relationships, because I guess that's my expertise. That's also kind of what you work with. But just as a kind of background, we know that politically single moms have been ostracized for years. Here in the UK, they were specifically singled out in the 80s as one of the main reasons the economy was so rubbish. There has been the Conservative Party, I think it was John Major at the time. Anyway, I'm not going to go into like old school British politics, but yeah, here in this country, we were basically painted as benefit scroungers. I guess welfare with you guys in the States, and that we were essentially, parasites of society, rather than, obviously I hate that kind of image, but I also hate the opposite, which is like the victims of society. So we have this kind of really quite difficult and complicated way that we're seen, that somewhere between forever victim and forever parasite. And so it's really hard. Even if you don't want to, you're going to have a lot of internalized shame. It's going to be that you encounter people who do give you shit about it. on top of the fact that realistically it's really hard being a single mom. You are doing the job of more than one person usually. It's much more often than not that women are the head of a a lone parent household. Not always, as we know, but it's close to 80-90% of lone parent households are headed by single women. So it's a big deal. You're usually, there are some financial issues, there's all kinds of things around loneliness, not being able to socialize as easy. You don't often have the connections, and you can have a really terrible romantic history, right? Like, we end up as single moms for a reason. Some people again do choose it, but most people it's not where you thought you'd end up. So you're dealing with kind of layer upon layer of quite complicated issues. And on top of that, you're not getting the societal support that I think that we deserve. Every single mom I've ever worked with or known has been completely formidable, quite the opposite of a parasite or a victim. And yeah, does a fine job of raising her kids, looking after herself, and is actually kind of a superhuman. So I think it's really important that we're all talking about that and sort of breaking down some of those stereotypes and shame. Obviously, in the area that I work with, it's very difficult to date if you're a single mom, practically speaking, but also unboxing all of that stuff that I'm talking about. The image of motherhood alongside a sexual image is very difficult for people to wrap their heads around for whatever reason. But yeah, there's just a lot to unbox. And I think we all feel it, whether we would like to admit it or not. I think anyone who's ever tried to date as a single mom, or even have anything remotely resembling a sex life, is, even if you don't want to date seriously, recognizes some or all of these things. There's body issues, I don't look as I did before before two kids. Sometimes you haven't been with anyone for a really long time, and that can be difficult. If you have a history of abuse, you've got that coming with you. There's a lot there. And yeah,
This is such, and I am so glad that the work that you do, because this is so important and it's not talked about enough. Because like, I feel like, and this could be my own, I have to be very careful about how I say this, but this could be what I see. But I feel like it's either, especially when a single mom is asking for help or trying to hold the other person accountable, it's they're angry and bitter at the baby daddy, and they're just an angry baby mama, and they're not, they're not actually, they don't need all of this help and they should do it all themselves. And which, that's just a whole mindset that we could probably rant on for like the next 10 years. But to keep me from getting my soapbox out, I'm trying to get better about keeping it on the shelf. Let's talk about that love and dating and sex piece. Because I mean, even me personally, and I told you before we started recording, like, selfishly, this is a conversation that I needed to have, because I realized yesterday, a little bit after the fact and processing, the last few weeks, the last like couple of months have just kind of been a dumpster fire. And I felt like I just honed in so much on the mom role that I lost myself as an individual human being. And yes, I'm a mom and I love my son, and it does, play a really big role in my life. But I was messaging my friend yesterday, and I told her, I was like, man, I feel like I've gone from like MILF status to just like trailer park stereotype. Like, I felt like I went so the opposite. And it's so hard to be both and to remain, be that, sexy and vibrant woman while also dealing with the stresses of motherhood in today's society. So what would you say? Because I know I'm not alone in this, because I've gotten quite a bit of people that have reached out to me saying the same thing. So how do you respond to that?
Well, so similarly, as I described at the beginning of this conversation, I have not been feeling my hottest self over the last few months. And I think we have to be realistic with ourselves that sometimes the role of just getting everything domestic done you need to and being mum is like the priority, and giving ourselves that grace and being like, okay, I've not been my hottest self the last couple of weeks for whatever reason, and all reasons are valid, There's too much pressure on women in general to constantly be put together and be feeling really sexy while simultaneously not being too sexy, and never dipping into like promiscuity or anything like that. You don't want to be like a slut. I've got my air quotations for anyone who's just listening to audio, but you can't really win. So that it's a good place to start, where you're kind of like, okay, I'm damned if I do it, damned if I don't. If I'm too sexy, I'm going to get judged. If I'm not sexy enough, I'm going to get judged. And then just being like, okay, this is where I've been for now. And as you've just said, like, you do naturally come out of these cycles anyway. It's quite rare, unless you are going through, you know, something that's very, very difficult. And of course, people do. If you're going through, you know, you've got a sick child, or there's something really big happening, then, you know, that's what's happening, and you have to go there first and give yourself that grace of okay, it's not a priority right now. But when you do want it to be, also giving yourself permission to do that. And I start with really, really simple practices that have no external reflection whatsoever, of like wearing things that feel really good, and tasting things that feel really good, and making my space nice, and making it smell good, and just getting back in touch with my own sensuality as a solo act. Which you can do even if you are a mum who lives completely alone and is not going to see another adult for whatever reason for the next couple of weeks. And it's just starting to give yourself that little bit of pleasure in your day to day can be a really great starting point for a very big transformation. You know, it has a knock-on effect. If you start thinking, oh, my bed sheets feel really lovely, or for no reason, I'm just going to change them today, and I'm going to light a candle, and I'm going to have a great bath, or whatever gives you sensual pleasure, whatever feels nice. And just kind of starting there, without putting too much pressure on yourself, because it's sometimes the leap, the big leap from I haven't got out of my pajamas for 3 days, and we have all definitely been there. I've basically been like a couch surfer for the last whatever. So it's very hard to go from that to feel like, to having a kind of Hollywood makeover and being like, oh wow, I'm showing up as my absolute foxiest self. And it's much more about just building up day on day what feels good for you, and sort of sinking in with that, because I do think your sexuality and your sensuality has to start with yourself. Obviously it's a relational thing, assuming that you want to have sex with someone else eventually, but you can do a lot of it at home alone, and perfectly appropriately around kids. So it's, you know, just starting to put your bodily comfort first is a good place to start. If you're kind of feeling far away from lingerie and heels and actually meeting anyone in real life, that's a good place to start. And just dipping a toe and going, right, does this feel comfortable? Is this too much for me right now? Do I need to take a step back? And just, you work up, and eventually you can work up to a self-pleasure practice. You can bring in more elements of masturbation. You can start talking to people and thinking about those things, thinking about what it is that you might actually want, because we don't, do we? Initially, you go, right, well, I know kind of what I don't want. I don't want to repeat this pattern of something that's happened before, and I'm not looking for this. But we forget the other side of maybe thinking about what we want. And I've found that single motherhood has given loads of women, you know, a sexual revolution, actually, because a lot of the kind of morals that we grow up with around sex and romance, a lot of the ideas we have about traditional families just kind of get blown up. You know, the fairy tale is well and truly over when you've found yourself in what you never expected to find yourself in. And then you get this privilege of being able to write your own rules and being like, well, what is it that I actually want? Do I really want to get married again? Is that something that is going to work for me? Is that what I want? Do I want someone to co-parent with? Do I not? Do I really enjoy having my own space, and I just want someone that I can have really great chemistry with and get away with sometimes and just be, you know, an adult in my own right, and a woman in my own right, and just sort of playing around with what is possible, because there are so many things that are possible that we don't even consider. We tend to sort of default to what society says. Well, you know, if you're a single mom, society already thinks you're trash, so you might as well you might as well completely own it and make things work for you and your family. Yeah, does that answer what you were asking a little bit?
Absolutely. And oh man, there's so much of what you said. But specifically when you talked about the fairy tale blowing up and, society puts all of these expectations on single moms. And let's not get into the fact that a dad's a good dad simply by showing up every other weekend, but a mom has to do everything, but, all of that. But between the fairy tale blowing up and reaching that place of realizing that you can set your own boundaries and your expectations, you're in a really vulnerable space. And that can actually be a really dangerous place to be in, especially when you've gotten out of an abusive relationship, because now you think it's normal. Now you're wasted by society standards. No man's going to really want you. And so then you're in this place where you take scraps, and that's dangerous. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yes. Yeah, obviously, this, I know this is like the crux of our work. And this is why I got into this line of work in the first place. I saw so many of my friends just head into car crash after car crash. Myself, I did as well. After my abusive marriage that resulted in my kids, with my kid's dad, I walked into another abusive relationship after having thought I'd done so much work and I was not going to end up there again. And it was exactly what you're talking about. I was lonely and I was used to abuse. It was something that I had to work through from my childhood. It's what I recognized as love. And it is something that feels familiar, that is the right kind of wrong. That whole thing of like, well, it was like the abuse I witnessed growing up, so it kind of felt homey and easy. And for somebody like me, that centered around a lot of drama. So I found it quite difficult to become attracted to people who were healthy, because it didn't have the intensity, it didn't have the obsession, the kind of constant texting and the like complete overwhelm of my whole life, which I know is a clear sign that something is going to be bad news. These are all the red flags, but I was mistaking them for things I thought were attractive. My type, my type is somebody who's very interested in what I'm doing all the time and is constantly checking in and is just, actually really overbearing and controlling. But for me, that until I cracked that and recognized that, I realized that was what I was attracted to. And everything else just felt a bit flat. And so we have to somehow suspend things a little to recognize that healthy doesn't always feel as exciting initially. And that can be quite tricky to get your head around, because if you're attracted to high drama, or if you're attracted to narcissists, or you're attracted to, straight up sociopaths, then a normal, healthy human being is not going to seem like they're that interested in you. And you're going to be a bit like, oh, like, do you not care like about every single detail of my day? And of course they don't, because they're healthy people doing their own stuff. And so that was my personal one. That took quite a lot of working through and developing my own life to be big enough that I really not only didn't need somebody to take that much interest in me, but I really didn't want it, because I'd recognized that was red flags. But yeah, loneliness is the killer. If you have not had anyone pay much attention to you for a bit, or you've had quite a lot of negative attention, someone just showing up as kind to you can feel very intoxicating. Just kindness. So I meet women all the time who are like, oh, he's really nice to me and he says I'm attractive, that means that he must like me. And I'm like, well, no, because sometimes people are nice and they're complimentary. So let's not like put all our eggs in that basket straight away. And often I find with mums that they have been slightly starved of that affection and attention and adult communication, that they want to rush and give themselves away to anybody that comes along. And as you say, like scraps sometimes. And we are particular targets to certain types of weirdos as well. it's normal for us to have our lives together to some extent. You know, we've got houses, we've got kids, or we've got decent living situations, and lots of people who don't have kids don't have that. And so that's attractive to somebody who actually is genuinely slightly parasitical, who would like to walk into a ready-made situation where there's food on the table and laundry gets done and there's a secure roof. So we have to be quite conscious of that people are dating us for the right reasons. And people can come at you through a whole series of different ways, which I'm sure you know. One of the big ones is being great with your kids. I hear this so much. Oh, he's so good with my kids. So it must be serious. No, sometimes people are great with kids, right? Sometimes people just like kids and they have lots of younger brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews, and they're just great with kids. And it's from a well-intentioned place, but it's not a sign that they're serious about you. They just like kids. And the flip side of that is somebody who's showing you that they're good with your kids to get in with you, which is a lot more sinister and is genuinely quite dangerous and happens all of the time. So you have to be slightly careful about this relationship with your kids, which, you know, mums know that anyway. We know it up here, but actually when you see somebody like playing a slight dad role with your kids, it can be absolutely intoxicating. And you need to be able to recognize where that's coming from in them and whether it's genuine. And so, yeah, obviously integrating someone into your kids' lives is a huge thing to navigate. So I work with a lot of people around that. But we can mistake all kinds of things for love if we're desperately looking for somebody to love us. So it is that like beginning stages. It sounds so cliche, but you have to build up your self-esteem to a point where not only do you not have a huge vacuum that needs filling by somebody else, that you are quite topped up on your own in your own right, and you do love yourself and you do have enough going on in your life, and you've got a support network and you've got friends and you've got passions and you've got your own life together. And also that you understand what you deserve and what you're not gonna put up with less than. You know, we're not going to take on guys who can't support themselves, who aren't independent, who are here to take something from us, because frankly we don't have that much to give, and that's also fine. You might have loads of heart and love and you know, like adult stuff to give, but you know, often financially we don't have much to give. And lots of women end up with a sort of slightly dependent teenage spouse. This is very common. It is not a reflection of you or what you deserve, but it is something that will come your way if you allow it. So there are particular hurdles when you have kids. Sometimes very controlling men are interested because you're not actually that much of a threat. You're not out every night of the week drinking and going out with your friends, and you're a fairly safe bet in terms of not running around and cheating, for example. So you just have to be mindful of this. I'm not trying to paint a picture that everyone who's going to be interested to you is a monster. Certainly not true, but just an awareness that can be, there are other motives, especially if you are somebody who's grown up with abuse or has had an abusive partner. You know this as well as I, if you have been the victim of abuse, you're more likely to become the victim of abuse again, because they are drawn to you in lots of ways. And you do offer up quite an enticing prospect if you are a mum and they think that you're operating from a scarcity mindset where you think people will have to get over it. It will be a huge sacrifice for some people. I hear this all the time, like, oh, and he's okay with the fact that I have kids. And I just think, of course he's okay with it. Like, what on earth? Like for my current partner now, it was a perk, you know. He was in his mid-30s and he didn't necessarily know if he could have kids. Turns out not a problem, but you know, he was worried that was, you know, that wasn't going to happen. So it's you know, actively exciting that there were children involved. But it's just about getting really clear with yourself, not having a huge gaping hole for somebody to fill, and recognizing that you are the target to a certain type of nightmare, and just being aware, just testing the water, really sinking in and feeling, does this feel like love? Is this is this what love should feel like? Not like, do I recognize this abuse and it's homely? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that it was so good. And all of those things are so important. The thing for me personally, and I know that I'm not, if I've learned nothing else, I've learned that if I feel something, I'm not the only one feeling something. We love to put us in this box where we feel like we're alone. And when we feel like we're alone, we're even more vulnerable, because then we latch onto things because we're the only one, and then there's shame around that. And for me, I used to be that person with the big gaping hole, and I took anything and everything that I could possibly get. That's a really horrible way to say that. That was, but sorry, I have a 12-year-old brain, my out of the gutter. But now I feel like I'm at the opposite end, where I've reached this place where I'm like, okay, like I'm good where I'm at. And I am so afraid of getting into that relationship because I'm afraid of going backwards, or I'm afraid of getting with somebody and trusting that person and then being manipulated. And I realized that that thought process has pushed me into one of these stupid situations. I hate that word, but it's like the best, like the situationship thing, where you get the quote unquote good things from the relationship. And now I've reached this place where I'm like, all right, I think I'm ready for the actual emotional intimacy, the vulnerability, the having someone there, not just to, cuddle with when I'm sad, but someone to actually be my partner. But I'm simultaneously afraid of it because of my self-sabotaging characteristics and habits in the past. And so I know that for you, that you do work with women like that. So what would you say to the women like me who are now more so afraid, because now there are kids involved and you're afraid of getting involved with someone who's going to hurt your kid or hurt you in front of your kid? Or then there's like the fear of getting attached and then the relationship doesn't work out. And then there's like, all right, well, there's already the baby daddy issues. And now there's like there's so much. What do you say to women in nice shoes, I guess is the best way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, and again, you are definitely not alone. As you know, like this is a very, very common thing. You swing from kind of taking any old thing that comes along to being like, well, don't think anybody will be able to break through these walls. And it can be really, really hard. It's a huge barrier to intimacy, especially if we start looking at our relationships from a very solo perspective. I think it's really important to remember that relationships are exactly that. They're relationships. They are like in dynamic. They are not we live in a very consumerist society, but that, your partner is not there to like fulfill your tick lists of things you'd like your partner to have. They're not there to be your dream, your goal, to fix anything. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up with what we're terrified of happening, what we're scared of, that we can look at the minutiae of people and be like, you can throw them out for any old reason, right? And we can have a very, very, very clear picture of what we want, but that is you're consuming then, you're picking a new pair of shoes or a new home or something. And relationships don't work like that. They're very scary because they do require you to be intimate, and intimacy requires you to not be there telling somebody what you're like, letting them judge what you are. So I know it's very easy to meet people online now, but obviously you have a strange dynamic there where all they're getting is your self-presentation of yourself. All they're ever going to know of you is what you tell them and vice versa. So you're inventing a whole person. So when you chat to somebody online, you are projecting what you think this person is to yourself. You have created yourself often a completely ideal partner. if you like them enough, you'll kind of be like, oh, I'm really into this. And then you meet in real life and you're like, oh God, you're not like this. And then they're disappointing to you. You think, oh God, like I've done it again. I've found another complete useless one. And that happens a lot when you put up these barriers, because they stop us taking those risks of dealing with a real human being. And I think talking to yourself and like finding examples where it's not true is a really good place to start with that. So if you are convinced that everybody that you could possibly pick is going to be abusive again, and you're going to make shitty judgments because you have done before, then that's not true, is it? You know, there are people who have extremely healthy and deep and meaningful connections with their partners even after abuse, and you must know them. Like, you know me, I have one. And it's that is a huge risk, but starting to shift your own perception of like the truth is a good place to start, because that means that you can start to take that gamble again. And it will be a gamble. And it could be that you invite somebody who's not quite right closer to you than you think, but you won't ever invite them close enough again to truly wound you, because you've done that work and you know what you deserve. So when you do recognize something that's a genuine red flag or is genuinely a sign of something abusive, you will know. And there is the level of suspending your heart without blocking people out completely. So I always have people do a slightly vague list of things they want. And I know that sounds, it's like a balance in between like making a checklist of what you need your partner to have and be, which is actually a very big block to intimacy, because you'll throw people out because they're wearing the wrong shoes or something, as if that's genuinely a deal breaker, but like it's obviously not, but you're just terrified of finding anybody. So you make a list of like, what are my actual deal breakers? Like, if this comes up, I'm leaving immediately, no matter what. Like, for me, it was like they hate all their exes, or or they have a conviction for child abuse or something, you know, like these are things that you're like, I am out of there in the middle of a date, I'm off, I'm gone. So you need to know what they are, because otherwise you might get caught up in the moment and miss them. And this just gives you that security that you know that you won't, right? You can trust yourself not to miss a glaring red flag if you've been really clear with yourself before meeting anyone what they are. And the other side of that is just absolute must-haves. So if you're a mum, you know, eventually, if you want something serious, they must be okay with kids, right? There is no point going on date 2 with somebody who doesn't want kids. You're going to waste your own time, you'll waste their time. And treating it as a slightly distant act at first. Oh, turn-ons is another one. Like, what are my personal turn-ons? Because once you know what actually kind of arouses you and gets you excited, that can be something that you've put on ice for ages and you've not really thought about that. And treating dates with the knowledge that they're not an interview. I know, again, we live in this huge like vat of consumerism, but you are not being picked. And that's really, really important. You are not there to be picked, chosen, interviewed, interrogated. All a date is feeling out a mutual connection and seeing if there's enough to see the person again. That's it. Like, pressure off, because you don't need, you're not being chosen. We have such a like culturally toxic idea of love where there has to be the trial and there has to be pain and there has to be ambiguity of like not knowing if this person likes me or not, and like we've all got to give each other the runaround. No, like your date, while you're in that like early dating stage, your dates are simply, do I want to have another drink with you in a couple of days, weeks time? Do I ever want to see you again? And it's so much easier if you put yourself in that headspace than they're like, oh my God, do they like me? Am I being likable? Your job is not to be likable. Your job is to be there. Okay. So you don't have to be anything. You just have to be present, because then they get to pick you, because it is a relational, not pick you, but they get to decide as well if they want to see you again. They get to decide. You're giving them that consent by like allowing them to see who you are, not who you say you are, but who they see you as. Because my partner, like if I asked him if I said to him, like, describe me to someone else, he's going to say a whole bunch of shit that I have no idea about, like that I don't recognize in myself, that I don't like about myself, perhaps. And the same with him. I'm going to describe him in a way that he would be like, that's not my, what? We are very we control our image very strongly online, especially if you do anything like we do, where you are literally controlling your image because you're trying to say a thing and you make content about certain things. That's not allowing anyone really in. I mean, you can allow them into it, but it's always through your own lens. So just taking that step back, knowing that you're not there to be chosen or picked, you're just there to be like, is this dynamic a thing that we both want to do? And then you're not worried about rejection, and you're certainly not worried about rejecting somebody else, because you're not any less of a great person if somebody's like, oh, this isn't right for me. And similarly, they're probably not right for you. They probably aren't because, you know, they're probably not the person, right? Like, we've all got a variety of kinks and stuff we've been through and personality traits, like, that we may or may not need in our lives at any given time. And it just takes that pressure off. And it means that you can try, you can let the walls down, because there's literally nothing at stake other than like, did I have a nice evening or not? And, you know, that seems like it's worth the risk if you are looking for long lasting love.
I, I feel like that is such, and this is the power of coaching, guys. Like, this is the power of getting the outside perspective, because that seems so simple. Like, the way you said it, it's like, obviously, like, we're choosing to add the pressure on it. I never thought about it that way. Like, I never thought about just going just to see if I want another date. Like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, is he going to be safer on my kid? Is he going to be safer on me? Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when eventually I do reach a point where I do want to be physically intimate? Like, oh my God, all of these things. I think about all of that before I even go out.
Right.
And that adds so much pressure. Dear God, that adds so much pressure. So for everyone, she's not calling you out personally. I think maybe she might be in my head calling me out personally, but you're not alone, and I'm right there with you. The other thing is that this involves so much self-trust. It's trusting your gut and trusting that you're going to make the right decision. That just because you made the wrong decision in the past doesn't mean that that's your curse forever. And that's my biggest fear, is that I'm going to make the wrong choice and trust myself. So how do you build that sense of self-trust, to trust yourself enough to say stop when it needs to stop, to leave when you need to leave, or to keep going when you want to keep going?
Well, you know, you have touched on some of it. Like, if you come from an abusive past where you've been hurt, you have learned some lessons, and you need to like know that you've learned them. I mean, like, you must have done. You certainly couldn't do the work that you did if you didn't recognize what abuse looks like and feels like, right? Like, it's just yeah, it sounds a little bit kind of airy fairy, but as you say, trusting your gut can be really difficult if it has bitten you before, or your gut's been a little bit off. So I guess it is a trial and error a little bit initially, where you kind of go, oh, what did I think? And taking it slow. Like I said, just go for a coffee and then be like, huh, do I like this person enough to want to have a coffee? I mean, make it as small as you need to, in order to be like, I know what I want from this very, very small, low pressure situation. And building it up from there, knowing that you have learned lessons, knowing that you are not blind to what you were blind to before, because you've seen it. You're a human, we grow, we learn. Knowing that if you make a mistake again, you can survive it because you've already survived something. Knowing that it doesn't diminish you in any way if you do get it slightly wrong and you wind up a little bit more entangled than you'd like to. But in taking each step at a time, you give yourself out before you have like run to like integrating someone into your family, or you've jumped into bed with somebody when you're not quite there. And it does just get turned back on, especially if you're doing that work that I sort of touched on before, where you start re-engaging with your own sensuality. You'll suddenly realize that you're getting a very strong chemical response from somebody. It's like, oh God, I might want to sleep with this person. Like I might want to have sex with this person because I'm getting all those feelings rather than like feelings of fear and of overwhelm. And I'm sure you know this, like once you like once you know a psychopath, you see them everywhere and you see them on TV. Like I can't watch anything with being like, that's the killer. Like, you know, this stuff, it's there. You know what their eyes look like, you know what they sound like, because you've walked that road before. You are not naive. You are not in, you know, you are not the victim of your circumstance. You are like the master of what has happened to you before. It is there. Like you have to be able to lean on yourself, and that is a process. I'm not saying that like if you have just come out of something and it's very, very scary to go on a date, like take it at your own pace and test it. I mean, like when you feel like it might be that your whole body's screaming at you that you want to shag this person, try a kiss and see where that feels. And make sure that with every date that you go on, that you feel safe. I mean, if going out for drinks at night feels dangerous because of whatever's happened, don't do that. Make sure that you are meeting people in a space that makes you feel safe. Don't go around to someone's house before you like 100% trust them. And that could mean meeting a bunch of their friends. That could mean going on like 50 dates. That could mean like starting at a hotel where there's like other people going, whatever is there to make you feel secure. And if you don't feel secure, know that you can just leave. You don't need to give an excuse. I mean, if you want to give an excuse, we have kids, use them. Oh God, I gotta go run off. If you're not quite there to be like, look, I'm not feeling this. You can cut dates short. At worst, they'll be a little bit disappointed and they might be a bit like, oh, I really liked you. And then you kind of get used to being like, I'm afraid it just wasn't there for me. And you get used to hearing that. And it turns out that it's not as terrifying as you thought it was, as with everything. And you're not going to put yourself in a situation where you're going to put yourself through years of physical abuse, because you know that you wouldn't stand for that now. So it's just an internal and external process of trying something, taking that little risk, however small, and then you can retract from it whenever, and just checking in with yourself and taking it slowly.
I feel I say this all the time, but I feel so selfish with this podcast because like it just gives me the excuse to have conversations like this. And that, I mean, I don't know how you got in my head, but this was a conversation like I really, really needed. Something that I want to touch on though before we wrap up is holding back and taking things slow. Like I am not shaming anybody for what they choose to do at all. Do what you want. It's your body. You do what you want. But I know for me, it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to have sex. It's that I wanted to feel loved. I wanted to feel like I had that, that endorphin rush in that moment. I wanted to feel like I mattered, because outside of that, I feel like I didn't. And one of my biggest fears is that I'm going to jump into that too soon, because it is my habit and it is something that I've done in the past. So how do you begin to heal from that and trust yourself enough to know that you're having sex for the right reasons? I guess. I hope that makes sense. Am I making sense?
No, and it's really, really common. It's common with all genders. It's common with people who haven't had abusive relationships, but just like have felt unattractive at whatever point. Sometimes that can be enough to see sex as oh, I'm being chosen here. Like somebody's finding me attractive. They're giving me this attention. And that's, it's not the best reason to have sex, but it's not the worst thing you can do either. So giving yourself that grace of being like, oh, okay, I did a thing. Lots of women find that when they become mothers, they either go on a bit of a sexual rampage where they like get a lot of fantasies out in the open that they'd always wanted to try and they felt too nervous to, or they had this kind of moralistic attitude. And lots of women go the other way, where they go, no, I'm going to wait for at least love, if not marriage, before I sleep with someone again, because I have been damaged in that particular way. I think knowing that sex is about your pleasure as well is one of the most important things. We as women are not taught this. This is not the narrative we get at school. It's not the narrative we get anywhere. It is, again, it's that pervasive thing of like, you're chosen as a woman. Somebody wants you and they've chosen you, and that now you're theirs. You need to like flip that script and getting in touch with your own pleasure and starting to, so I'm like a big fan of masturbation, which anyone who follows me knows, but like, you know, knowing what feels good for your body, knowing what your sexual pleasure does feel like, so you can slightly recognize when it's not that, when you are doing something for a different reason, and then if you don't want to not. It's just about, yeah, recognizing that like sex, though it is a communal act, and obviously it can be one of the most beautiful connective experiences, if you have not come from a history of pleasure, prioritize that. Like, just put yourself first a little bit. Like, if you're somebody who sleeps with men, like, they're gonna be fine, you know, like, you don't really have to worry about their pleasure. That's not really your responsibility. Like, that's their responsibility. Your responsibility is your own pleasure, your own excitement, what feels good. And it's the same things that fight, like flight or fight thing, where if you're suddenly just feeling like tense, scared, nervous, leaving the situation, knowledge is power as well. If you know that that's a pattern of yours, you can not do it. You know, you know what you're doing. You don't have to worry about it, because you know it's there. It's not like news to you. It's not something that you have to look back in retrospect and be like, kind of feel a bit crappy about that happened last night and I'm not really sure why. You know in advance that you're a bit like, oh, I might be doing this because I want to feel validated in some way, or I want somebody to pay me attention, and I'm worried that if I don't have sex with this person, they might run off. And it's like, dude, do you really want to be with somebody who like is only if you don't want to have sex one night? Like, and this is so hard, and recognize that it's hard. This is not easy for anybody, even in a marriage, even in a healthy marriage. There will be times where you do feel slightly rejected because you've made a move and somebody's rejected it because they're not in the mood, or they're just feeling kind of bodily self-contained. And just normalizing your pleasure, it can be quite challenging. I mean, just for a massive overshare, like my partner and I sometimes have times where we're a bit like, oh no, we'd rather just do things with ourselves. We can't be bothered. Like, sometimes it is just that, like, I can't be bothered to connect right now. Actually, I'm just feeling quite internal, and normalizing that, and just getting really comfortable with your own pleasure and knowing that it's not shameful, and that is why we have sex. And that is, you know, aside from procreation, and just super normalizing with yourself that it is for you to get off, you know, like that's why you're there. It's like, yes, sure, it's connective, sure, like it's a big part of intimate relationships, sure, it's like if you ever want to have kids or a marriage, it's going to be with somebody else, but really normalizing getting off. And then you start to find that when you are with somebody that you're not really turned on by, you don't fake it. You know, that's the thing that women do all the time. You don't fake it because you're not overly preoccupied with what's happening for them. When you have good sex, it's because it feels good, right? You never have to fake anything, because if it's not happening for you, you're really comfortable just being like, I had a nice time, but I didn't come. I didn't. And that can be really challenging at first. Even just saying that, like, no, you didn't get me off, doesn't make you a bad person. And just really normalizing, being open about that, because we are surrounded with so much shame. And, you know, I've done it. I'm sure every woman's done it, where we've like pretended it was a little bit better than it was, even to ourselves, because we've lumped this whole thing that if he's sleeping with me, then he really likes me. And that's another one of those things that is not a sign that somebody is really into you. Great chemistry can be so confusing. It means that you ignore all kinds of things, and then you have to give yourself that grace and be like, okay, I shagged somebody I wanted to for 3 months, and no, he wasn't the love of my life, and no, I didn't get a husband and a co-parent out of it like I wanted to, but I had some good sex, and that was fun at the time. And just, yeah, checking in with yourself and pulling away whenever it feels wrong, and just starting with a kiss, with a touch, and seeing how that really fits with you. And you do get good at it. You get good at it quickly. It's just a new skill like any other.
I feel like, I feel like we could probably just talk about this for the next like 10 years. There's so much. And the number one takeaway, like something that I've really been internalizing as I'm like opening up to the idea of potentially dating. I don't know if I'm quite ready to start yet, but just opening up to, it's just like you said, like when it comes to sex, we're there for us. Like, yeah, we want to make sure the other person feels good, but we're also there for us. It's the same thing with dating. Like they're not there. We're not just like cattle on display. We can also say, this wasn't great. You're not a terrible person. I'm just not interested. Yeah. Like we can say we're not interested. We can say it wasn't good for us. We can say that it's not what we want and we're not terrible people. It's not just waiting for them to give us our validation and give us this gold medal that they've picked us up at the market and, oh, we've been chosen. Like we have a right to be like, nah, I'm good. And that's okay. Right.
And also you owe them that respect as well. This can happen on the halfway through the first hour of meeting them. You might just have a full body no. And I'm not saying that this may be because your walls are up and you're not quite ready, or it may be because it's a no from you, and that's fine. Or it could happen like 3 years down the line and you suddenly realize, oh God, like I've really given this a thing, and you owe them that respect to make the choice of the knowledge that you are not currently there for whatever reason. So I think just being very comfortable with recognizing how you feel about somebody. It can be challenging, but it's, yeah, we do it with, you know, people who have been through abusive things sometimes don't do it anywhere. We don't stand up to friends and family. We don't have boundaries in place at work. We don't have any of that stuff. So we're not used to doing it. But once you start getting used to doing it, you will do it everywhere, and life will be so much more enjoyable when you start doing that. And that's the reward. You suddenly realize that you're having better dates, you're having better sex, you're feeling more confident that you're not picking another complete wrong un. And it just makes everything better and easier.
I cannot thank you enough. You are such an amazing human being, and these conversations are so important. And this is not easy stuff to talk about in the world, unfortunately. And especially when you dive in head first and you're just like, all right, like this is me, this is what I'm talking about. It's so needed. It is so needed. And I'm so glad that you exist and that you do what you do. So where can everybody go to follow you, to get to know you, to work with you? Because I know for me, I think I've got like 2 hours worth of journaling I'm going to have to do tonight just to like process this conversation. So if they want to know more, where can they connect with you?
So I have a website at juliacoziamani.com. I have the worst surname, so you're going to have to check your spelling and spelling again, everybody. So I am on Instagram at Julia Coziamani as well. And I have a podcast as well called MILF School, where we talk about all kinds of provocative mum things and relationship things. That's mainly where I hang out. I've got a program actually starting at the end of September, which is going to be a group coaching program and a self-study package. Yeah, come and hit me up. Occasionally I have one-on-one spaces, so it's always worth a try. But yeah, I'm back. I'm actually becoming more present online again after my vomiting hiatus. So yeah, really excited to be back. And yes, thank you so much for having me, because I feel the same. Everything you talk about, and I'm just like, oh, these things need to be said. So yeah, it's such a pleasure to come and join you.
Well, we're going to have all of those links in the show notes as well, because I get it. My first name is super basic, but it's a pain in the ass to spell. So I just make sure they're clickable links in the show notes. If you're listening, show description. If you're watching on YouTube, click the link, get connected, and reach out. Like, reach out, ask questions. She does not bite. She's such a great person. Like, I know for me, when I connect with people like on podcasts or on YouTube, I feel so hesitant to reach out because it's like, oh, well, I heard them here, so they're like the next level up. No, We are here to serve you and to show up. Ask the questions because one, you're helping us out because it tells us what content to make. And two, we want to help you. And we can't help you if you don't ask. So reach out. Julie is amazing. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for you.
Thank you. Me too.